So we've begun a lecture here on the skeletal system, but this is just a very small portion of it because the skeletal system, at least the anatomy thereof, we're going to be looking at it. We're just going to be looking at half of it. So today we're focusing on skeletal anatomy. And of that anatomy, we're going to be looking at the appendicular skeleton. The appendicular skeleton. Anybody know what the root of the word appendicular is? What word do you know that starts with that? Appendages. Yeah, these are the appendages of the body. Okay, so what would the appendages of the body be considered? Like, what are some examples? Yeah, arms. So arms, legs, hips, shoulders. That's our entire focus on this 8-day section, okay? Is that we're just looking at the bones and markings thereof on those things. And again, like I said on our sheet here, the bones are going to be in caps, and the markings are going to be in capital and lowercase. They're kind of tabbed over underneath each of those. So arms, legs, and what's called the pectoral girdle, which is the shoulders, and the pelvic girdle, which is the hips. And so that's our focus here today. Well, before I get into the anatomy of this, I want to talk about some general anatomy in the terms for markings. Terms for bone markings. Okay. There's one we see over and over again on here that I really want to spend a little bit of time on because it's weird, and if you've never seen it used in this context before, this is a word that you've seen probably hundreds of times in your lifetime. The word process. You see it here over and over again. Process, 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 process. Well, knowing process, you think of it as a verb. It's like something going through something, like your payment was processed, or something is being done. In anatomy, the word process is a noun, not a verb. Okay? And a process is a projection or protrusion, and these are not great words. You're like, okay, word that I don't know with two other words I don't know. So projection or protrusion. I'm going to give you my terminology. A sticky, outy thingy. If it juts out of bone in some way, it's a process. And bones have lots of those. Sticky, outy thingy. So if you look at any bone, you'll notice they have lots of little bumps and things that stick out. So here's the proximal end of the humerus. It's got this bump right here and another bump right there. And here's a bump, there's a bump, everywhere's a bump. Sorry. There we go. Sing it. Yeah. E-I-E-I-O. So there's another one. Here's another one. All these little things. Okay? There's a reason. And the reason, maybe you know, why do we have so many sticky outy things on bones? Alright, I'll tell you. We've got 206 bones, but we have over 600 muscles. And 11 times out of 10, the reason there's things sticking out of bones is because there's muscles that attach. You're like, 11 times out of 10. Yes, that's to help you remember that a lot of times it's more than one muscle that will attach to each of those little sticky outy things. So it makes it a lot easier for muscles to attach when you have something that's jutting out of the bone for the muscle to attach to. Now, beyond just the initial here, I want to talk about other types of processes. Okay, these come under the heading of a bunch of different names, but they all really technically are processes because they're things that stick out of bones in some way. First one, an angle. That's a process. On the scapula, we have 2 points, and they stick out, so that technically they're processes as well. Angle, tubercle, tuberosity, trochanter, condyle. Put an asterisk next to condyle. It's kind of a rule that is also an exception. Epicondyle, malleolus, eminence. And there's others too, but in what we're studying right now, this covers it. There's also protuberance and things like that, but those are going to be in the axial skeleton. So all of these stick out of bone in some way. So why so many names? Well, the names have to do with these are all a little bit different one from another. A trochanter is a huge bump, whereas a tubercle is a pretty small one. Tuberosity in between. Yes.
What's the last one?
I'm really sorry. I didn't spell that great. Okay. Eminence. E-M-I-N-E-N-C-E. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. All right. So, eminence. All of these are types of projections in some way, but they're all a little different one from another. These two right here, condyle and epicondyle, are near a joint of some kind. All right, so condyle is at a joint. It actually forms the joint. In fact, your femur connecting to your tibia are the condyles of the femur that touch, well, the cartilage, but then the condyles of the tibia, okay? And they're rounded projections at a joint, okay? I put the little clarification for the asterisk down here. Can jut out or dent in. So that's kind of a weird exception for condyles. Sometimes they will actually dent in, and by that definition they're not really going to be a process, but most of the time they stick out. Epicondyles on the side at a joint. Okay, let me try to illustrate this. Okay. Okay, so like here's like a milk bone that you like give to your dog, right? And like every toy bone that's ever been made or anything that's supposed to look like a bone, I want to present to you a challenge and a statement. I don't think, and I've never seen, a bone like this in anything that has ever lived or is living. Okay? There are bones that have this at one end, but not at both ends. I challenge you to find me a bone in anything alive or that has ever lived that actually looks like this with the two little knobby things, 2 condyles at each end. They don't look like this. All right. But for the purpose of illustration, the end of this right here is a condyle. Okay? But then note that it also kind of sticks out to the side like this here as well. The part that sticks out to the side is called an epicondyle. So those 2 little bumps right there are condyles. The ones on the ends, on the sides like that here, are called epicondyles. All right, so those are all just bumps, guys. You look at all these terms, and they're bumps of differing sizes and amounts and things like that, but essentially they're all just bumps or sticky outy things. Well, besides a bump, we need there's 2 other major things, okay? Besides processes, there's also this, a fossa. A fossa, not to be confused with Mufasa, that's something different, okay, is a shallow indention or depression. That's the same thing. It's a dent of some kind. Fossa, shallow indention or depression. That is a fossa. So by this definition, some condyles are actually like fossas. All right. Here is the elbow joint. Okay? We're looking at the distal end of the humerus on the anterior side. Okay? So this is right at the elbow joint. What makes the majority of the elbow joint kind of looks like a, if you can visualize this, a fist with its thumb out to the side here, punching a snake in the mouth. Can you see that? I do not ever recommend punching a snake in the mouth. That is a cougar in the face. No, sorry. That was. Please do not strike wild animals or domestic animals. All right. I think I've covered myself legally. All right. Now, this right here, the snake's mouth is the ulna, okay? And the fist right here is the humerus. Well, see the bottom of the jaw of the snake has to be able to fit. If we flex the elbow and come all the way up, there's a point, and it has to find a place that it actually would fit in there. That point does. This is called the coronoid. What do we call a sticky outy thing again? Process. This is the coronoid process right here. Well, it's got to fit into something. So when the elbow is flexed, it fits down into the coronoid. What's an indention called again? Fossa. This is the coronoid fossa. Now, if I flip this over, feel your elbow right there. This is the snake's head. The big bump on your elbow there, that's the ulna. Now, feel back up above there, there's a dent. Now, you'll feel your tricep there, but there's also a dent right in there, okay? Because that has to be able to have a place to fit. On the posterior side of the distal end of your humerus, you have this large indention here that this big bone, this big bump right here, this big projection fits into. And you're like, wow, that looks way different than the other process. You are right, okay? Process is a very loose term for something that just sticks out in some way, okay? And all these terms, though some of them tighten down to a little more specific definitions, they're all things that stick out. This is the olecranon process. Therefore, what would you call this? The olecranon fossa. It fits right into the olecranon fossa. So some fossae, that's the plural, some fossae actually don't have something that fits into them either. On the anterior side of the ilium of your pelvis, there is an indention there as well. There's really not anything that fits into that except for maybe your organs. They don't really, it's not like a joint for bones like that. Okay, so besides fossa, one last thing. This word you've seen before, but I'm going to pronounce it differently. Oh, gosh. Maybe not. Maybe it's spelled differently. Foramen. The word is foramen. I just got thinking, I thought it was the word foreman, like for a job, but I think that actually has an E here instead. Foramen. And a foramen is just a hole through bone. There's not as many foramina is the plural. There's not as many foramina that exist in the appendicular skeleton as do in the axial skeleton. And the axial skeleton includes the skull. There are lots of holes in the skull because your brain needs lots of stuff and it needs to send out lots of stuff, like nerves, and it needs to receive blood, and it needs to send out giant nerve tracts and stuff like that. So there's lots of foramina in the skull. But I think foramen in the appendicular is pretty much limited to the obturator in the pelvis. But most of the time, these holes are something that allows for either blood vessels, nerves, or lymphatics to travel through. So you have sticky outy things that have lots and lots of names. You have a fossa, which is a shallow indention, and foramen, which is a hole. So that is your major markings to get started with then today.